Chapter 27 of Lotus Buds. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nadu. Lotus Buds by Amy Wilson CARMICHAEL. Chapter 27. The Secret Traffic. Sir, to leave things out of a book because they will not be believed is meanness. Dr. Johnson. When first, upon March 7th, 1901, we heard from the lips of a child the story of her life in a temple house, we were startled and distressed, and penetrated with the conviction that such a story ought to be impossible in a land ruled by a Christian power. The subject was new to us. We knew nothing of the magnitude of what may be called the secret traffic of India. A traffic in little children, mere infants oftentimes, for wrong purposes. And we did not appreciate, as we do now, the delicacy and difficulty of the position from a government point of view, or the quiet might of the forces upon the other side. And though with added knowledge comes an added sense of responsibility, and a fear of all careless appeal to those whose burden is already so heavy, yet with every fresh discovery the conviction deepens that something should be done, and done, if possible, soon, to save at least this generation of children, or some of them, from destruction. It is useless to move without a body of evidence at your back, said a friend in the civil service to us at the close of a long conversation. If you can get the children, of course they themselves will furnish the best evidence. But anyhow, collect facts. And this was the beginning of a notebook, into which we entered whatever we could learn about the temple children, and in which we kept letters relating to them. By temple children, throughout this book, we mean children dedicated to gods, or in danger of being so dedicated. Dedication to gods implies a form of marriage, which makes ordinary marriage impossible. The child is regarded as belonging to the gods. In southern India, where religious feelings run strong and the great temples are the centers of Hindu influence, this that I have called the traffic is worked upon religious lines, and so in trying to save the children we have to contend with the perverted religious sense. Something of the same kind exists in other parts of India, and the traffic under another name is common in provinces where temple service, as we have it in the south, is unknown. Again, in areas where, owing to the action of a native government, temple service as such is not recognized, so that children in danger of wrong cannot, strictly speaking, be called temple children. There is yet need of legislation which shall touch all houses where little children are being brought up for the same purpose, so that the subject is immense and involved, and the thought of it suggests a net thrown over millions of square miles of territory, so finely woven as to be almost invisible, but so strong in its mesh that in no place yet has it ever given way. And the net is alive. It can feel and it can hold. But all through this book we have kept to the south, to the area where the evil is distinctly and recognizably religious. Others elsewhere have told their own story, ours, though, in touch with theirs, and that its whole motive is to save the little children, is yet different in manner, and that it is avowedly Christian. India is a land where generalizations are deceptive, so we have kept to the south. We ourselves became only very gradually aware of what was happening about us. As fact after fact came to light, we were forced to certain conclusions, which we could not doubt were correct. But at first we were almost alone in these conclusions, because it was impossible to take others with us in our tedious underground hunt after facts. So the question was often asked, but do the children really exist? I have said we were almost alone. Not quite. Members of the Indian civil service, who are much among the people, knew something of the custom of child dedication, but found themselves unable to touch it. Hindu reformers, of course, knew, and 2 or 3 veteran missionaries had come into contact with it and had grieved over their helplessness to do anything. One of these had written a pamphlet on the subject 20 years before our nursery work began. He sent it to me with a sorrowful word written across it. Results? Nil. But we do not often meet our civilian friends, for they are busy, and so are we, and the few missionaries whose inspiring sympathy helped us through those earlier years were in places far from us, and so were all the reformers. So perhaps it was not wonderful that, beset by doubting letters from home and a certain amount of not unnatural incredulity in India, we sometimes almost wondered if we ourselves were dreaming. Well, if they do exist, I hope you will be able to find them, varied by, well, if you do find them, they will be a proof of their own existence, were 2 of the most encouraging remarks of those early days. From the beginning of this work, as stated before, we have tried to collect facts about the traffic and the customs connected with it. Notes were kept on conversations with Hindus and others, and these notes were compared with what evidence we were able to gather from trustworthy sources. These brief notes of various kinds we offer in their simplicity. We have made no attempt to tabulate or put into shape the information thus acquired, believing that the notes of conversations taken down at the time and the quotations from letters copied as they stand will do their work more directly than anything more elaborate would. Where there is a difference of detail, it is because the customs differ slightly in different places. No names are given for obvious reasons, but the letters were written by men of standing, living in widely scattered districts in the South. The evidence contained in them was carefully sifted and in many cases corroborated by personal investigation before being considered evidence, so that we believe these chapters may be accepted as fact. Dated quotations from the Madras Mail are sufficient to prove that we are not writing ancient history. January 2nd, 1909. The following resolution was put from the chair and carried unanimously. The conference, consisting of Hindu social reformers, cordially supports the movement started to better the condition of unprotected children in general, and appreciates particularly the agitation started to protect girls and young women from being dedicated to temples. May 8th, 1909. Once more, we have an illustration from Mysore of the fact that the government of a native state are able to tread boldly on ground which the British government in India are unable to approach. At various times, in these columns and elsewhere, has the cry raised against the employment of servants of the gods in Hindu temples been uttered. But as far as the government are concerned, it has fallen, if not on deaf ears, on ears stopped to appeals of this kind, which demand action that can be interpreted as a breach of what religious neutrality, which is one of the cardinal principles of the British rule in India. The agitation against it is not the agitation of the European, whose susceptibility is offended at a state of things that he finds hard to reconcile with the reverence and purity of divine worship, but it is the outcry of the reverent Hindu against one of the corrupt and degrading practices that, in the course of centuries, have crept into his religion. In this particular instance, the Mysore government cannot be accused of acting hastily. As long ago as February 1892, they issued a circular order describing the legitimate services to be performed in temples by temple women. In 1899, the Muzrai superintendent, Rai Bahadur, A. Srinivasa Charlu, directed that the temple women born on the Najugad temple establishment should not be allowed to perform tafe, or dancing, service in the temple, but that the allowances payable to them should be continued for their lifetime, and that at their death the vacancies should not be filled up. Against this order the temple women concerned memorialized H. the Maharaja as long ago as 1905, and the order disposing of it had only just been issued. In the course of the latter, the government say, from the Shastraic authorities quoted by the two agamiks employed in the Muzrai Secretariat, it is observed that the services to be performed by temple women form part and parcel of the worship of the god in Hindu temples, and that singing and dancing in the presence of the deity are also prescribed. It is, however, observed that in the case of the temple women, personal purity and rectitude of conduct and a vow of celibacy were considered essential. But the high ideals entertained in ancient days have now degenerated. The government now observe that whatever may have been the original object of the institution of temple women in temples, the state in which these temple servants are now found fully justifies the action taken by them in excluding the temple women from every kind of service in sacred institutions like temples. Further, the absence of the services of these women in certain important temples in the state have become established for nearly 15 years past, and the public have become accustomed to the idea of doing without such services. The exclusion of temple women from temple services obtains in Mysore and in the case of a few large temples whose Tastak Patis have been revised. But the time has come, the government think, for its general application, and they therefore direct that the policy enunciated in the abstract given above should be extended to all Muzrai temples in the state. It is to be hoped that the good example thus set will bear fruit elsewhere, where the temple women evil is more notorious than it was in temples of Mysore. A copy of the government document to which this cutting relates lies before me. It is bravely and clearly worded, and its intention is evident. A high-minded Hindu, and there are such, let it not be forgotten, revolts from the degradation and pollution of this travesty of religion, and will abolish it where he can. But let it be remembered that, good as this law is, it does not and it cannot touch the great secret traffic itself. That will go on behind the law, and behind the next that is made, and the next, unless measures are devised to ensure its being thoroughly enforced. Cuttings from newspapers, quotations, evidence. It is not interesting reading, and yet we look to our friends to go through to the end with us. Let us pause for a moment here and remember the purpose of it all. And may the thought of some little loved child make an atmosphere for these chapters. End of chapter 27.